89. Actually, Dr. Abubakar Bala is an artificial intelligence researcher. He's working on fault prediction in industrial system. Dr. Abubakar Bala is also involved in computer vision research of breast cancer classification from tissue images. He also authored and co-authored several publications, both national, Nigeria, and international journals. So Bala also does public speaking and also write fiction stories. So this is just few among his achievements. Actually, Dr. Abubakar Bala, he is an alumni of UTP. He finished last year. Dr. Abubakar Bala, please permit me to call you upon for the presentation. Thank you so much. Please give me a round, please.
Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The Miss President, the Miss Vice President, the other Miss Executive members, the other normal Miss members, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to the presentation. Today I will try to talk about the Nigerian Civil War, the facts and forgotten lessons. And the outline of the presentation is as follows. I will talk about what happened prior to the First Republic, talk about the crisis of the First Republic, then I will go and talk about the first Nigerian coup. I'll talk about the second coup, or as it's famously called, the counter coup. Then I will go on to talk about the Aburi Accord, the war in general, and then the question of genocide, whether the war was actually a genocide or not. And then I will talk about the aftermath, what happened after the war, and how Nigeria was able to be united again into a single bloc. And then talk about a few of the lessons, and then take a few questions, answers, or corrections from the audience. For the sake of our international audience, Nigeria is a country in the sub-Saharan Africa. Here we are, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa. We have neighbors. We neighbor a minimum of around 4 countries. From the north, we have Chad. Towards the south, we neighbor in Cameroon and Benin Republic. And towards the top, the north, we have Niger Republic. So this is where Nigeria stands in the global stage. And of course, see, this is the whole African continent. Nigeria has 36 states with the federal capital territory, Abuja, in the middle. And this part of the country is usually called the north. The lower part is generally called the south, with this part called the southwest, and here called the southeast. And then around this part, it's called the south-south. And they are the breadwinners of the country. They produce all the oil. So this is the country in general. And of course, the most populated part of the country will be Lagos, with presently around 20 million people, followed by Kano with 15 million. The total population of Nigeria is estimated today to be around 200 million. So we have 200 million population. It is predicted that in the next 50 years, we will be the second most populated country in the world. Behind India, we will overtake China. So India will be number 1, with I think over around 2 billion people. Nigeria will be racing towards 1 billion. China is declining, maybe will go less than 1 billion. So that's why in Africa, I think if you find 7 Africans, I think 1 is a Nigerian. So that's why anything happened. So sorry for the South Sudanese and everybody. So you're very few in the global affairs of things. Why about war? I mean, it's quite ironic in a time when we're talking about the independence to unite the country. Why select a topic about war? It's very interesting because even with the president we discussed, and we felt, okay, why should we talk about war at a time when we're talking about reconciliation, uniting the country? We said, okay, look, if you don't talk about the past, the problem is you create a vacuum. And in that vacuum, anybody, any opportunist can come and put any garbage information into the vacuum. And if you're not careful, he push you back to a civil war again. So to avoid that vacuum, we need to put the actual facts, so that when the garbage comes in, people already have a filter to know where the lies are. Also to understand why it happened, so that we can prepare and avoid it from happening again. Also, we learn from the mistakes of both sides, because the war was the bloc, the northern bloc, of course, together with the western, against, if you would like, our brothers in the southeast, as it's called today, but at that time in the eastern region. To understand why it happened, the mistakes that happened, and also see how we can forge ahead and make a better united country. We have to look at prior crises, because if you look at every crisis that happened in every part of the world, usually there's a precursor. There's certain bits of the crisis that happened here and there before the final crisis, erupt, and then you have a crisis. In 1945, there was a just crisis, because at that time there was a railway connecting Port Harcourt, which is at that time the eastern region, to Jos Plateau State. So at that time, a lot of our brothers from the Igbo tribe, generally because the eastern region is predominantly Igbo. Of course, there are certain minority tribes, and the north, at that time, predominantly Hausa Fulani, and the west is predominantly Yoruba. But as I said, we have a lot of tribes in the middle around, but these are the main blocks of the country. So as early as 1945, there was a crisis in Jos, and I think people can know how Jos is synonymous to crisis. But this time around, it was a Hausa Fulani crisis with the Igbo. In the potato market in Jos, there was a little problem, and then it leads to two deaths, I think, from both sides. And it was recorded by the colonial, because then we were under a colony of the British, of course, the British was there. So you can see as early as that time, because the Igbos were flocking through the rail line from Port Harcourt, and then they were sharing the market with the Hausa Fulani, because houses also were the settlers. We had the local entities in the Plateau State, but the houses were, because Plateau is very unique at that time, because it was a tin mining site. So a lot of people came, and then there was a lot of competition between the tribes, and then there was that crisis as early as 1945. There was also the Kano riot of 1953. It's quite interesting because towards the end of the 1950s, we know that the British, after suffering a lot of losses in the Second World War, was about to give independence to many states. And at that time, they also wanted, of course, to give independence to Nigeria. And then the proponents for independence were, of course, people from the eastern part of the country. The North, well, fortunately or unfortunately for the North at that time, we had very few people going into Western education. Why? Because the Western education at that time was brought in by the missionaries. And already the northern part was predominantly Muslim already before the colonial masters came. So there was a reluctance to join the Western education. So at that time, the North felt the country was not ready for independence. And while the Eastern brothers, because they were already passed into the system, they felt it's time. So the North was afraid of being dominated by the Eastern region at that time. So there was that problem. And then the AG, of that time we had political parties, 3 political parties, which emanated from cultural organizations. We had the Action Group of the Western region, the NPC of the Northern region, and of course the NC of the Eastern region. So the Action Group came to Kano for some rally, because like you have today for campaign, and then there was a riot that broke out. And of course at that time, and even as it is today, in the north, you had what we call Sabon Garis. And in the Southern Garis, you had Easterners. Because it's quite interesting, I'm repeating myself here, is that because the North didn't go early into education, so most of the clerical positions, the nurses and medical doctors were from the East. So a lot of Easterners were in the North, and they were situated in the Southern Garis. And in this crisis, I think also there were some lives that were lost. So this is the Plateau State is around the middle of the country, and Kano is in the north part of the country. So these are some of the crises as early, even before the independence. Now, after the independence, after the election, after the election in 1960 and the start of the First Republic, we call it the First Republic. Now there were also a lot of crises. Now the first crisis was that, as I said, there was competition between the parts of the country. The three parts were all in competition and suspicious of the other part. The North afraid of being dominated by the South, and the South also being afraid, just as you have today. Everyone is afraid of each other, So at that time, there were this minority tribe. They are minorities actually, but there was a lot of problem with the chiefs. The TV are also in the central part of the country. There was an attempt by the NPC, which was the predominant party in the North, to really infiltrate and stop a small political party, which was called the Middle Belt. I forgot the full acronym, but it's a Middle Belt party, to stop them from getting votes. And then there was also a riot broke out, and the military had to be called to settle the riot. This is in the 1960s, around 1964, 65. Also, census is a very critical issue in Nigeria, even as at today. It's very hard to get the right number. Because one interesting thing, as we know, because at that time we had a parliamentary system. So your representative in the parliament depends on your population. So anytime people go to count, when you count the North, they will inflate their figures because they want more representatives in the parliament. And in the South also, when you go to count, they will inflate their figures to get more representatives in the parliament. So there was a lot of crisis. And up till today, it's very hard to conduct a transparent census. You cannot do it. It's not even possible because every region will inflate its own figures. So that also crisis erupted in the First Republic. And this First Republic, as I said, is 1960 to 1964. And also the major concern of the South, or if you like the West, both the West and the East. If I say the South, now today they are called South, but at that time it was the West and the East. Was that the North was so large that they almost alone could set up the government with a few votes from the other regions. But alone, the Eastern region and the Western region could not form a government. So they were concerned about the large size of the North. Also, there was a labor crisis for almost 2 weeks. Just like we have a strike now in ASU, we are in the 8th month of the strike, so that time the labor also had a strike. There was also the election crisis, 2 election crises. First, the major election crisis was in the Western region. There was competition between the 2 strong men there, Awolowo and Akintola. And there was a heavy crisis there, a lot of people lost their lives. They were the same party, but then the party was factionalized. Akintola on one side and Awolowo on the other side. So the crisis led to a declaration of a state of emergency in the Western region. And of course, an administrator was put upon the region. And then Awolowo, of course, was tried for treason. You know what happened? He was tried for treason and found guilty and was jailed at that time. So there was a lot of crisis, as I said, in the First Republic. So this is the Western region crisis. And eventually the election was conducted and Akintola won the election while Awolowo was already in prison. So this is the First Republic and how chaotic the First Republic was. And then some people in the military at that time, when the British left, we had 3 categories of people who joined the military. There were those that were NCOs, as they call them, non-commissioned officers. Non-commissioned means they are other ranks, who were moved for training and then later became officers. And there were those that maybe after college, people like, for example, the present President Buhari, after college, they were just sent to Sandhurst for training and they became officers. And there were a 3rd category, people who were graduates who joined the military. Now, those graduates were quite, of course, because they had degrees, they already have known a lot of things about philosophy, about communism. So when they joined the army, they tried to change the country through the army. So they did a coup d'etat to cause that kind of change. So and that coup was plotted by this membership. These are the plotters of the coup. Now I wouldn't mention the names because the names are quite large. But if you look at the names of the coup plotters of the January 15 coup, most of them are from the east. And of course, when I talked about the East, predominantly our brothers of Igbo tribe. And I think we have only one person from the West and only two people from the West, one lieutenant and one major. But majority of the plotters were from the East. And these were their victims. My victims, I know people who lost their lives in the coup. If you look at the victims, the premier of the northern region lost his life. The prime minister of that time also lost his life. The premier of the western region, Akintola, who just won an election, also lost his life. The finance minister. Now, but the natural victims, if you look, most of the victims are from the north, and then a few from the west as well. But if you look, I think only one, I think a police officer, only one was from the east. So there was this conspiracy. I don't know, it's not a conspiracy because like if you add two and two together, it looks like there was a target by the Eastern Bloc to kind of eliminate the leaders of the other regions. And interestingly, also, they eliminated certain top military men from the north. You know, so given a chance for mostly an Igbo takeover. So what happened is that the republic in 1966 was down, and generally the top military ranking officer, who is Agaya Aronsi at that time, took over. Now, for him, it was quite difficult because he was not part of the coup. You know, he was not part of the coup, but he tried and suppressed the coup plotters. And of course, when he came to power, he arrested them. But it was very difficult for him to convince the remaining part of the country that he was not part of the coup, because it seems that he was a beneficiary of the coup. And being also an Igbo made it more difficult for him. So although he arrested a lot of politicians, he could not arrest politicians from the north because he was afraid of inciting, unrest. And one thing that really cost him a lot of problems was the unification decree. Now it's good to look at Nigeria, how it was in the 1960s. In the 1960s, we had regional governments, and each region had its own civil service. And when Aronsi came, he wanted to unify the civil service so that now we had what we wanted to have a federal civil service, just as we have today. And now the North was offended by that because the North, as I said, were reluctant to join the Western education, and anything that will make it look like, to make it equal, they know that they will lose, really. I mean, the North, because at that time they will lose. So there was a huge protest in the North around May, and the North is famously called Araba Riot, which the North wanted to move out of the country. And it was quite, of course, when I say a riot in Nigeria, of course, you have some loss of lives. And it's hard to know the count. Even today, when there's a riot, it's hard to know the real number of people that have lost their lives. So you can only estimate. And then he tried his best he could to unite the country, but unfortunately, the northern soldiers were also planning to overthrow him because they felt that the soldiers in January united and killed their own northern top military men, and the top premiers in the regions. Now it was time for them to take a revenge. And they did, of course, in July. These were the people that now in the north, you remember the first coup was organized, as I said, mainly by the east, and it was tagged an Igbo coup. But really, when you study the literature, you realize that their motivations really was not an ethnic motivation. Really, they wanted to bring in a revolution, but these people were very young. It's quite, when you read the literature, these people were in their late 20s and early 30s. So it's hard for them to understand the implication of what they were doing. But for them, their aim was to stage a revolution, and if it had succeeded, they wanted to get Awolowo from prison and make him a president. So you see, you could say that their motivation was not really ethnic, that's the January coup. But the problem is the way it was executed, you know, and all the victims were from the north, made it seem like it was an Igbo coup. For example, the premier of the Eastern region was not killed. The president, who is also an Igbo, was conveniently abroad in London when the coup happened. So it looked like these people knew what was going to happen. And also the way Ironsi was able to suppress them showed that a little bit, it's very hard for you to say there was no conspiracy. So this group of men, famous among them, of course, was Colonel Murtada Maramat Mohammed. They staged another coup, you know, and then, of course, famous in this group, you will see the Abachas and Buhari. And so this the North now staged another coup. And in the coup, their victims also were quite large. The victims were mostly from the east. They took down, of course, the general officer commanding the Agaya Oronsi. The governor of the western region also was with him, and he was down. So a lot of the victims here were from the east. And you can see you have almost 250 non-commissioned officers. And of course, actually, it was very crazy because the NCOs of the north really went ransack. And they were killing a lot of the soldiers from the eastern region. Not only the soldiers, a lot of civilians also lost their lives, some even in the airport, some in the train station while trying to relocate to the east. Many lost their lives. Now then there was a stalemate. A stalemate is in the case that they staged a coup, right? But they were young officers. They could not take over power. You see, so negotiations came into play. Their leader was Murtala Mohammed, but he was not a top-ranking officer at that time. The top-ranking officer after Ironsi was down was, I think, Agundipe, and then you have who's a Western region, and you have Adewale. I'm very bad with the names. So they had these two military officers ahead of Gawon. Even Gawon was ahead of Murtala, you know. So now there was a debate on who should now lead the country after Ironsi is down. And the coup plotters insisted that a northerner must take over. Now you jump over Ogundipe and jump over Adewale. So they pushed Gawon like 2 steps ahead, you know. And then they insisted that Gawon would rule. And of course that offended the governor of the Eastern region at that time, Emeka Ojukwu, who insisted that even if Ironsi is down, that the next officer in rank should be the head of the government, not the one who is like the third, you know. But they insisted, and then eventually the Murtala Mohammeds now backed down, and Gawon took over. But as I said, Emeka Ojukwu, who was the governor of the Eastern region, did not agree to the arrangement. And of course, it led to a stalemate, and then Aburi came over. Now, the main concerns of Ojukwu was that the one was not the highest ranked military officer. In fact, as I said, there were 2 people ahead of him. And he wanted the federal government to renounce the use of force. I mean, he decided not to join the Supreme Military Council. He didn't join any of the meetings as a governor of the Eastern region. And also he wanted regional autonomy. Regional autonomy is like what people today are clamoring for, called restructuring, where every region will have almost independence, but then you have a cerebral head, or what they call titular, like the queen. Like you have somebody at the center to coordinate, and every region will have its own autonomy. And then all decisions should be made by consensus. So these are the main concerns of Ojukwu in Aburi. And of course, Gawon assented to many of those made a lot of concessions, and later resigned it, of course, because of course many of them was like making Gawon just a queen of England. I mean, having no power. After he came out, they revealed that he had to renegade on a lot of that. And one interesting thing that really convinced the coup plotters of July, that's, you know, we had two plots, the January coup and the July coup. Now the July coup plotters wanted to secede the north from the country. But the problem they had, of course, as I said, Nigeria is a very dicey country. Oil is always in the politics of the game, you see. Now, if you secede the country, they were told, look, you become landlocked because you don't have access to the ocean. Not only do you become landlocked, you don't have access to oil because the oil now is in the eastern region, right? And also you don't have money. The money is in the CBN in Lagos. So that's why they agreed to later join the republic. And what I call the July coup plotters are the Murtala Mohammeds and T.Y. and Jumas. So of course, this are the agreement in Aburi, and this is of course the head of state at that time, General Gawan. And then the war erupted. Why? Because, as I said, when Gawan came back, he renegated on a lot of the agreements in Aburi, because of course, as I said, nobody will accept those agreements because it was trying to make him just a toothless bulldog. And then, of course, Ojukwu, after the creation of states, Gawan created a state dividing the eastern region into three: River State, I think Central Eastern, and I think that. So he divided the eastern region into three. I forgot the name of the three. And then, of course, that provoked Ojukwu into declaration of independence for the eastern region. And of course, another thing that motivated Ojukwu was a lot of dead bodies, were returned from the north. Just like you have some of us that experienced the crisis in Jos or something. Anytime there's the dead bodies are returned to their home. So when the dead bodies and something come, the sympathy and everything, the energy is quite is quite high. So of course the war started, and he declared he called the nation Biafra, and of course he got support from these countries. These countries were the countries that officially accepted Biafra. And then he got, of course, supplies from France and Belgium. And then, of course, Nigerian government got supplies from the UK. And of course, that's why I think recently when the Queen of England died, a lot of our brothers were quite insulting about the Queen of England, that she played a role in the Civil War because of the deaths and everything. But it shows our ignorance of government. The Queen of England had no power whatsoever. For I think since the Second World War, she has been just a ceremonial head. The Prime Minister of England is the one taking, the House of Commons are the one making decisions. So the Queen has no say really. Even today, the Queen or the King is just there, and of course the government is called Her Majesty or His Majesty's government, but he has no constitutional role. He's just a symbol of tradition. So insulting the Queen doesn't make any sense. At that time, the Prime Minister was, I think, Wilson. So he was responsible, the House of Commons, not the royal family. Another question of genocide. After the war, a lot of pictures were coming out and to ask whether the federal government, the Nigerian government, really went overboard in trying to get Biafra back to the country. Well, but we have to also at the same time look at these three issues, because the distinction between a war and a genocide is that in a genocide, you don't have a choice of surrender. Like in the Second World War, the Jews had no option of surrendering. Anywhere the Nazis fight the Jews, they were killing them. Or in Rwanda, the Tutsi and the Hutus, you don't have a choice to say, I give up. So, and they said, okay, that's your free. No, you have to be killed. That's a genocide. While in a war, you have a choice of surrendering. The moment you surrender, your enemy will say, okay, that's all. That's the distinction. So the Biafra had a chance of surrendering. They had also two chances of getting aid of food from the Nigerian government. And at the same time, they had also a chance to get daytime, because the Nigerian government at that time refused to allow night influx of food into Biafra, only daytime. But the government at that time in Biafra refused all these options. At the same time, one also needs to look at the documents, because at that time there was allegations of genocide by international observers. So Gawan allowed international observers to come and check the war to see whether the genocide is happening. And their unanimous decision was that there was no genocide. And of course, even events that happened in the aftermath of the war showed that the intention was not to exterminate the tribe, because after that, there was the no victor, no vanquished. There was the reintegration. It showed that the aim was not to exterminate, just like the Jews were, the Nazis was trying to exterminate the Jews or the Hutus, doing that to the Tutsi. Of course, as I said, after 3 years of battle, in 1970, Biafra later surrendered to the federal government and agreed to join the Nigerian bloc. So Nigeria was back again together, but not without the loss of estimated around 1 million of lives. As I said, in a war or in a riot, it's hard to find the actual number. You can only estimate. And because during a war you have a lot of propaganda, the victim will exaggerate his figure, right? Right? And so it's hard to get the figures. But a lot of people lost their lives. And so I think this is, in the nutshell, what really happened, the events that happened during the war. And as I said, the aim is not to trigger emotions, but actually to learn from what happened. As I said, what really we should learn is that when a crisis happens, no matter how small it is bound to spiral. You know, it started from a just riot in 1945, then the riot in 53, you know, then the first coup. Now, if you don't punish people for committing the small crime, it motivates them to commit bigger crimes. And we see this, because it's not a whole history of Nigeria, this same coup plotters, the Murtala Mohammeds that enjoyed the coup of that July, staged further coups in Nigeria until the coup was ended in 99. And I think it took the wisdom of the military to sack, you know, I think we should thank Obasanjo and Abdul for that. Any military officer that tasted political office for more than 6 months was retired in 99. I think we forget about that. All of them were retired. And that is why today we didn't have any coup, perhaps. If they had remained, because they knew the juice of political power, especially in Africa. Once you have political power, very soon you will see your bank accounts are filled, your Swiss accounts are filled, you are driving limousines and dining with the best girls, international girls. You know, this is African leadership, unfortunately. Once you give an African, unfortunately, most Africans, when you give them power, it's usually abused. So that's the lesson. As I said, also we need to study history and forge a better country. A lot of what triggered this presentation, and of course I must say, I will repeat again, I'm not an expert in historian on Nigerian issues, but I'm motivated to study history. Is certain posts you see on the social media, presumably about educated people who are professors, people who have PhDs, but they make posts that shows a lot of ignorance. Like, you cannot make allegations on the Queen, on civil war, that she has no say on it. Like, I mean, come on. But a professor did that, and it was viral, and then people are saying the Queen should. I mean, she has no responsibility whatsoever. She couldn't have stopped the sale of arms, really. Even the Prime Minister then, as we know, is a parliamentary system, is a vote, right? Once you're able to take majority in the parliament, then things flow. Even the Prime Minister at that time doesn't have, it's not a supreme, it's not like a monarchy where the only one man show, it's a parliament. So that's what triggered this, of course, haphazard attempt to talk about the Nigerian coup. Finally, I would like to thank you for listening to this, as I said, quite haphazard discussion about the country. But the most important thing we should take is as we build a stronger country, we should look at the past, that both our heroes, they are our heroes, but they have made their own share of mistakes. And we must give them the benefit of the doubt, because most of them, they were too young to really understand the implications of what they were doing. For example, when Murtala staged this coup, he was 28 years old, really. So he was so like carried by, perhaps by this youthful exuberance, if you will call it, to make the country better. But we are still reaping from the mistakes they have made today. And it is quite interesting that we should try as much as possible to understand the mistakes they have made, so that we don't fall into the trap again of some of the people, ethnic heroes we are celebrating today, that will tell us to take weapons against each other. And then, of course, in the aftermath, we lose hundreds of lives. And at the end of the day, we don't achieve what we want to achieve, because some people want to get power by all means. So they create this ethnic tension so that people can rally behind them so that they get power. But the most important thing is how we can forge a country together. As I said, Nigeria is the most populated black country in the world. We are projected to be the second most populated country in the world in 2050. If we can get things right, then it will be the pride of the black people around the world. And this is not me being racist, actually. We need a balance of power. We need every country to bring its contribution to the global stage. But today, Africa is more of a dependent continent. We receive food aid, we receive medicine aid, arms aid, everything we take aid, you know. We don't produce almost anything to the global, except our raw materials, you know. But even the raw material, we don't extract ourselves. The shell and the companies come. So literally, we are just a rent-seeking economy. So thank you very much for listening. For those of us interested in further reading, I recommend these two books. They are quite, they are written by, I think, non-Nigerians. I try to avoid Nigerian sources because once you read the source from Biafra, you will hear the propaganda. And when you read the source from the north, also there's propaganda. So I try to get European sources. I think they will be a little fair because they will have more helicopter view about the crisis. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Mr. Dr. Abakar Bala. Honestly, we may like to take only 3 questions, but before then, honestly, personally, I want to appreciate you for this lecture. Being an engineer, my mentality before was that I don't care about the history. I only pass my engineering courses and only that's what I do. But honestly, today I have learned a lot. And this history, initially, if you give me an exam on this, I can't pass it. Yes, I cannot pass it because I don't know them. So, but I am much enlightened also. And likewise, I think many of us are the same. So thank you for this presentation. We are going to take only 3 questions. If there are some people that may like to ask Dr. Bakar Bala questions. Doctor, okay, we are going to take Dr. Falalu first. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdulatif. So I would like to welcome everybody to this wonderful location and also thank our speaker. He has done justice to the topic, actually. But there are so many things we still need to discuss about this. It's a very long story, and it's still snowballing for what we have now. Nigeria is a blessed country with people, with resources, with all what you can think of. But when it comes to management, greed, and things take comes, as he has already explained. The coup and the effect of the coup, we are still suffering today. Even to tomorrow, we shall have it because it's not that far away. 1960, today. You can see just 62 years. So we have people that lived through the coup, people that lived through the colonial period, even to now. So they still tell stories, particularly those affected by the aftermath of the coup and the civil war. But as Dr. Bala said, we need to look beyond that. We need to forge a way ahead. Or we can't neglect our past. It's still very, very important. We need to learn from our mistakes. We need to learn from how we did things then so we will not repeat them again. The northern bloc, the western bloc, the eastern bloc, broken down into 6 blocks that we have now, we all need to integrate together and forge a way ahead. So my comment on this is just to speak to our fellow compatriots. This is just a wake-up call. We just need to contribute our own quota, no matter how small, no matter how minute. We still need to build our country back. We don't have anywhere to go. We can't come up today and go to Sudan or go to Pakistan or go to another country. Nigeria is our home. We need to stick together. We need to work together, and we need to forge a better Nigeria for our future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Falalu. Actually, I am also going to add what Dr. Abdul Latif said. It's not actually a question. But honestly speaking, what really is disturbing me is the preoccupied reasons of our youth. particularly on social media, precisely when we talk about Twitter. At this 21st century, when you go and start surfing internet, particularly Twitter, you will thought another e-country exists called Nigeria. This is quite disheartening. We as land scholars, we have to always base our contributions, our arguments based on facts. We should not be so cheap, to go and incite things, particularly, in our handles. I have seen so many cases where we have notable Nigerians, verified accounts. They have a lot of followers, and they don't mind, posting anything. This is quite, is threatening our, future generation. And God so kind, we are not hoping things will happen. But the youth of today, they are not the youth of the past. So we have to be very careful. We have to be very mindful. Let us try to promote peace, advocate for unity. We should forget the past, as what Abdul Latif has rightly said, and we should try as much as possible to contribute the best we can, little as it is. Thank you. So I don't know if Abubakar can, shed more light on, this. We shared common discussion informally on this Twitter arguments and the rest.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Bala, for this wonderful presentation. My name is Russell. I'm from the Republic of Zimbabwe. All right. So I've got basically two questions for you. The first one is that you gave us the history of Nigeria and the political coups that happened and that formed until basically 1999. What is the key lesson that you can share with the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa? Why I say Sub-Saharan Africa, because the thing is we share many similarities, many traits as far as our political situation is concerned. Zimbabwe itself, for example, in 2017, had a soft coup, to change power from Africa, we have a problem with long-time presidents who've been in power for decades. So how do we deal with those rudiments of that system? And then the second question is concerning the future, of Africa. We have seen the world over how certain Western powers wield influence as far as the media and the social media is concerned. For example, SpaceX, Starlink, they have the power to actually provide internet access, even though governments are attempting to fight against disinformation. So how do we safeguard the masses and the youth as Dr. Faralo has mentioned? Thank you. Because he's not from Nigeria, so allow him to ask this question.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Boy from the Martin from Cameroon. I just want to ask that, Doctor, in your humble opinion, do you think the Nigerian society has learned from the coup, in fact, from the Biafran war, viewing the fact that we have started seeing Biafran people starting to reclaim their land with their, and then you can see their leader who is in prison and of recent who is going to court and all those things. Do you really think the Nigerian community, Nigeria as a whole, both the government and the people have really understood this crisis and have drawn consequences for the future? That's what I really want to find out.
Okay. Thank you. I think thank you very much for the calculative and the following for the interesting addition. As I said, Nigeria is a very complex country, Many of us assume that leading Nigeria is easy. I think Nigeria is one of the most complex countries to rule. And you wouldn't know that till you have the opportunity to rule at the center. That's how you will know. Any movement you make will be looked at the tribal. If you appoint this one, the other tribe will say, so sometimes you are deciding who to appoint. This is the best candidate, but it's not the acceptable. So you have to sometimes keep the best and choose the acceptable. So it's a very difficult country, to be frank with you. And I sympathize with anybody that it's not, I don't envy people that are at the center. I sympathize with them, really. That's why you see people that have led the country before, they don't like to talk so much. Maybe I said to Obasanjo that even here, you have kept quiet now. But most of the past, like, they don't keep quiet because they know it's very difficult. You cannot, there's no way you can satisfy or even forge ahead. Certain things look very easy on the surface. But once you do them, as I said, look at Agaya Ironsi. He knew that they were corrupt NPC politicians, but he could not arrest them. Because he knew that as an Igbo person, if he arrests a northerner, crisis will start. Killings will start in Kano and everywhere. So you see, it's hard at times. You see somebody stealing and you cannot touch him because you are afraid of his people. And it's still happening today. Sometimes even you are appointed chief as minister because of his people. So it's very, very complicated to rule in Nigeria. It's not as easy as we said. So I think the comments are in line about the youth. The youth actually, because unfortunately for us, a lot of our youth are jobless. So once people are jobless and they have internet, so the only thing they can do is listen to music, cyber, because some of the politicians, they pay them. There are some people I know, they will camp them in a room, give them money for internet, and their job is to posting. Insightful, pay them 30,000 naira a month to be posting. So it's a job. So you cannot stop them. You cannot stop them from their jobs. So we need to create employment opportunities for our people. Unless they are gainfully employed, you cannot stop them from posting those, because it's a job really. The politicians are paying them 30,000 naira every month to be posting insightful pictures and something on the social media. So you cannot stop it because you have not created an alternative for them to make money. So I think that is about the youth. And I think for my brother that said about the lessons, and I can tell you we've not learned, because in Africa we don't like to document crisis. Like for example, in Nazi Germany, when you go today, all things that happened in all the killing camps of the Jews is documented. The camps are there, and the country has accepted responsibility. And they are even paying what they call it, repatriations to Israel, right? They are paying, I think up to today, they are paying some money as compensation. So they accept responsibility. But in Africa, we assume that not talking about it will heal. But as I said, if we don't talk about it, we create a vacuum. And that is why today those opportunists are using the vacuum to create their own misinformation. Because even at the time of a war, there was of course propaganda from both sides. So it's easy for me now to come, and because there's a vacuum, there's no documentation, official documentation of the history of the war, why it happened, the justification, how the Biafrans were integrated back into the country and everything. You see, because even the Europeans were envying Nigeria after the war, because they said even they have not reconciled, they have not solved their wars like Nigeria was solving their war. Because we had the no victor, no vanquish. Panels were set up. Even some Igbos were integrated into the Nigerian army. Like for example, Nzigu was even given official burial by the military. So, but all these things are not being said, and somebody can just come and use that vacuum and create, and we're heading there. Unless God saves us, the government has not learned, the people have not learned, because the problem is we have a large amount of, like 80% of Nigeria is youth, that's 30 years and below, and most of these youth are jobless. And jobless means literally they have almost nothing to do. They come in the morning, they stay on the street, they are just hustlers on the street, and then in the evening they go. So they are good recruits for all this anarchy. So I think roughly I have answered the question, right? Russell, also thank you very much. And he said about relation, how African, for example, can solve European dominance. It's very hard. when you are dependent on them for your arms, you are dependent on them in your medicine. You know, even malaria that they don't have, we are taking medicine from them. So anything, and even this as early as even the July coup, what really stopped Murtala from seceding was the American ambassador was there, the British ambassador, and they told him that we don't support. And if you take the North out, you will stop receiving aid. And that thing scares the shit out of African leaders. Because they know once they don't get the weapons, they don't get the money, they are dead. You get it? And it's very true. I mean, today America can kill a country by a snap of a finger. Just put a sanction. Look at Iran now, it's set on fire. You put economic sanction, the people become very hungry, and just a matchbox is remaining, and then the country is on fire. So it's hard. You must become independent. In quotation marks, we are independent in Nigeria, but we are still dependent. Deliberately, our leaders have refused to create that atmosphere. We can talk a lot about Nigerian issues, and it wouldn't end. Not to bore you down, I think I should give a chance to our father to speak.